I could tell somebody the most amazing things about God. But if my life doesn't reflect it, it's no good. Because leadership in the church is key to the health and the well-being of the flock, of the congregation. Good leadership is important. And as a leader of the church, I am responsible for your well-being, for your spiritual well-being. I'm responsible for making sure that the Bible is being taught. I'm responsible for making sure that sound doctrine is being shown and that people are taking that and living it in their lives. But even more so, I'm responsible for making sure I'm doing it in my life. We'll get to some of these requirements here in just a moment. I don't have the right, and leaders in the church do not have the right to say, well, what the people do is not my responsibility, because it is. Seth and I, we cannot ignore, and the deacons cannot ignore the needs of this congregation as leaders. God requires that we as leaders consider how our abilities and our actions will affect others. And I want to be honest with you, we will fail in that many times. Because we are human, just like you are. But that's why conflict resolution is so important. Why we still need to love each other through these things. Paul tells the church at Philippi in Philippians 2, he says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Now this is not that command there from Paul. And if you know anything about Paul, in 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about the fact that what I say, if you know me, he says, what I say does not come from me. This is a command from Christ. So all the things that Paul is saying, whether it goes all the way from everything, I'm just going to say everything that Paul commands in Scripture does not come from him. It is from Christ. He says that in 2 Corinthians. So this is not just for leaders. Everyone, all of us should do nothing out of selfish ambition. And we should humbly consider others more significant than ourselves. And this is one of the main requirements, especially for someone who wants to be a leader in the church. They have to have a sense of responsibility for those in the church, other than themselves and their immediate family. We as elders are responsible for God's extended family. And it goes further than even, now understand, I'm an elder of this church. As a pastor, I'm your elder, and Seth is your elder. But understand, we're not the elder of the Baptist church in town. We're not the elder of the Nazarene church or the Presbyterian church. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't care for their congregations also. I just can't influence them as much as I can you. So I need to focus on our flock here. I can care and pray for them, and I do. Matt, I'm friends with Matt, and I've talked to him many times. But I'm responsible for this church. I'm responsible for you. We have to have this sense that we are responsible for each other. So Paul lays out these guidelines that are to be used for the church when appointing the leaders. He begins by saying that those that wish to become a leader must be above reproach. Now you know I'm a very the three most important tools you use when interpreting Scripture is context, context, and context. And what that means is, what does the original language say? Who was it written to? What did they think it said? Because language matters. So we got to go back to the Greek, because this was written in Greek. This idea of above reproach many times has been translated as blameless. And that's true. That's what the term means. But it does not mean sinless. Because if it meant sinless, then none of us are eligible for leadership. Because there was only one man who ever lived who was sinless. And that's Christ. And he is the head of the church. But the elders are to be above reproach. They're supposed to be blameless. Now, what does that mean? It means that even though Paul does not mean that they have to be sinless, he does want them to be godly. They need to be living godly lives. The debate has been going on for centuries as to what Paul really meant in this. Where are the standards? What were the standards in the early church? Were they high or were they low? And you go to any church, and every church has a different standard for the most part. Most of the missionary churches are supposed to have the same standard. They don't, but we're supposed to. But there are some churches that have a lower standard. The requirements seem rather daunting. I mean, in fact, when we instituted elders, we're like, none of us qualify. None of us are really qualified to be elders. But with Christ, we can be. But it could be worse. Notice that the requirements for leadership does not mean you don't have to speak in tongues. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say you have to be a prophet. It doesn't say you have to dream dreams. It doesn't say you have to wrestle alligators. It doesn't say you have to climb a mountain. It doesn't say you have to have a vision. You don't have to perform miracles. So being above reproach is not nearly as bad as it could be. But this requirement for leadership relates solely to what example is that leader setting. Above reproach means, is there anything that you could be chargeable? The term above reproach or blameless in Greek means not chargeable with some offense. It means there's no proof that now, I've got to be careful with this. There's no proof, there's no reason for anybody to accuse you of being ungodly. Now, I know many times in churches it's been very easy for pastors, especially we've seen a lot of pastors who've fallen, because it's very easy to hide it. But that doesn't eliminate the rule. As elders, we need to be living our lives in a godly way that people can't charge us with sin. He's using this term to mean a standard for leadership that's based upon what others in the church see and what they observe. It's not based upon how we see ourselves. There are many, I think that's sometimes where pastors get in trouble. They see themselves as much greater than they should. And then that takes us back to Philippians, where Paul says, no, humble yourself. See others greater than yourself. It's reflective of how the community sees that potential leader. This is one of the reasons why what we do is when we want to install a leader, a deacon, we say, okay, this person is going to be an elder, and we give time. We give time for people to come forward and say, I have a problem with them, and what that problem is. Now, we don't do it quietly. You can't just sit there and write on a paper, hey, pastor, I know that this person did that, and I signed anonymous and put it down, and put it in under my door and say, hey, he has to do something about it now. No, that person needs to come in forward and confront that person, the elder, or at least talk to the pastor first, and then they go together and they confront the person about it. It can't just be because I have an idea this might be happening. It has to be proven. Jesus warned his apostles about those who were false. He says in Matthew 7:15-20, he says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. They look good on the outside, but on the inside, they're wolves. You will recognize them how? By their fruits. It'd be a lot easier for the church. It would have been a lot easier throughout time for the church if everybody had a badge and said, I'm a faithful leader, I'm a false prophet. But it doesn't happen. But we know what people are by their fruits. It says, are grapes gathered from thorn bushes? Well, no. Or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Again, it's how the community sees the leader. An elder's life should bear fruit in serving as an example to others, seeking to avoid others' concerns that they are guilty of biblical offense or not. We cannot ignore the concerns of the congregation. Because if we do, we are guilty of neglect And that is biblically wrong. We are overseers. We are shepherds. We are to be taking care of the sheep in the flock. Christian leaders should concern themselves at all times with the testimony of the gospel. And the testimony of the gospel is not just what I say, it's what I live. So if we see someone who's not living justly, not living in godliness, we need to confront it lovingly with the idea of restoring them, not of the idea of punishing them. And because God punishes, not us. But we need to restore them. We're responsible for the spiritual welfare of others as well as ourselves and our own family. Now you understand the weight that comes down on elders as you think about that. I got to think about what my life looks like. And believe me, that's difficult at times. Because I suffer the same temptations everyone does. And I have to look at everybody else's life and say, is that really what, are they reflecting the love of Christ in their life? If they're not, I have to talk to them about it. I should. With that caveat of knowing that people go through different phases in their life, we've got to have grace and mercy with the idea of maintaining relationships. Our lives must reflect the gospel in such a way to make it credible to others. I could tell somebody the most amazing things about God, but if my life doesn't reflect it, it's no good.